When to harvest? The time to harvest depends on several factors: bud development, weather, fungus, and thieves. Some pot strains mature earlier in the fall than others, depending on the latitude of the globe where the strain originated. You will need to pull indica varieties in late September and Colombian varieties in late October. The weather may also force you to pull early. If there is a severe freeze heading your way, you are better off not chancing that the weathermen are wrong and pull at least a majority of what you have. Another case for pulling early is if weather conditions are perfect for the fungus to run wild. This will also force you to pull early. And of course, if your site has been found or is in great danger of being found, you must pull everything to avoid losing out on what would otherwise have been a great year. For instance, if you have a site in a cornfield or other temporary situation, the harvest must occur at a point in time relatively independent of weather. Also try to find out if and when hunters start to roam the fields. One other thing to watch for is frost. Even a mild frost can damage plants, so watching the weather closely in late September and throughout October is important. If your plants do get damaged by frost, the herb is still harvestable, so don't give up entirely if you fail to chop before the first frost. If by some freak chance there is a frost in early September and the buds are still very small, you may want to allow the damage to occur and then let the buds finish maturing rather than harvesting a small quantity of premature buddage. This type of situation is an on-the-spot call, and you must consider many factors, such as bud size, weather predictions for the following weeks, strain of weed, location of site, etc., before deciding. Indica varieties usually mature sooner than sativa varieties, and the best time to harvest varieties acclimated to the Northeast is from late September to mid-October. Those varieties not acclimated to the Northeast, such as Colombian or Jamaican, are best left to late October or even mid-November if the weather permits. One other thing you want to avoid is harvesting in the rain. Moisture can lead to problems in the drying process, such as molds and fungi. The drier the plants at the harvest date, the better. As mentioned before, it is important to acquire seeds from strains that can be grown at the latitude you are at. Some Mexican or Colombian varieties may not develop mature buds until November, and by then the weather becomes harsh. Knowing when your plants will mature is difficult for beginners or growers using new seeds for the first season. Planning and getting to a good drying location quickly is important so the buddage is not left in bags for longer than a few hours. If the freshly harvested bud remains in bags for too long, 12 hours or more, molds and fungus will begin to destroy the herb. Once you get to your drying location, you need to prepare the herb for drying. This entails removing excess fan leaves and other larger leaves. However, if the drying spot has a temperature higher than 85 degrees, it may be beneficial to leave a few large leaves to keep the buds from drying too quickly. Typical places to dry are attics, closets, dresser drawers, and basements. The best position for a bud to dry in is hanging upside down in a location where air can circulate all around it. If you are fortunate to have a location that you can do this in, great. Otherwise, use a dresser drawer or some other concealed place. If you dry the buds in dresser drawers, remember not to double stack the buds, or the weight of the upper layer of buds will cause a flat spot on the buds underneath. Also remember to rotate the buds every day so the herb dries uniformly and you can check for any signs of mold or fungus. If space permits and you are able to retrieve the whole plant, roots and all, you can hang them upside down by the roots. But don't expect this drying procedure to yield higher quality bud. THC does not drain from the roots down into the buds. The THC forms in the resin on the buds. The entire drying process should take place over 4 to 6 days depending on the size and variety of bud, the temperature, and the relative humidity of the drying area. If the buds are dried too quickly, the flavor of the herb will become more harsh and the THC level may not reach its potential. If the pot is dried too slowly, then molds and fungi may develop and have a similar effect. With any method of drying, the process must be monitored on a day-to-day basis. Room temperature is fine for drying as long as the humidity is kept low. If drying must take place in a cool, damp place, then a fan and possibly a heater should be installed to compensate. A reminder: before you begin, growing outside is risky. And worse, if planting without permission on someone else's property. The charge of criminal trespassing and often destruction of property is added. On the other hand, if it is your parents' place, they can have their property confiscated. And farmers have the tendency to set booby traps, or shoot trespassers. That said, let us do some growing. Remember to read up on the strain you are growing, and understand the amount of bloom time it needs. If you are in a short summer area, stick with a short flowering strain. Your seeds/seedlings will veg until late summer. Then begin to bloom, and not be ready to harvest until near the first frosts in the fall. Some even later, so plant accordingly to either bring them inside, or tent them against the elements, if growing a long blooming strain. Do not wait until summer to start your seeds, if you wish to grow full-sized plants. They need at least 2 months of vegging time before bud. Example: USA and Canada. Bloom begins in early to mid-August. Harvest in October. Your best bet is working from clones, because you know they are all female, well-rooted, and already leafed out a bit. Cut them, and start the rooting process at least 3 to 4 weeks before you plan to plant. Then follow the hardening off process. But since most growers start with seeds, if at all possible, start them in small planters, under a 10 outside. See how at http://www.marijuana-cannabis3176.html. That way, they are already hardened off, and won't scorch when you plant them in their permanent spots. Pre-sprout and plant the seeds in small pots of seed starter mix. Put black plastic on the ground inside your tent or cold frame and set the pots on the plastic. You can also run a drip hose over the tops of the pots for easy watering. If tenting is not an option, start them inside, preferably under a metal halide, only because it is a stronger light and again helps avoid sun scorch. However, most folks start them inside under compact fluoros CFLs. Keep the lights on 24 hours a day if using the CFLs. 18/6 with the metal halide, they need as much light as they can get. And note, being under 24 hours light doesn't make them stress